Good to have you with us. Hey, joining us now in studio, we're fired up about it, is Kathleen Murray from Kathleen Murray Real Estate. She's a sponsor of the John Fredericks Show. Great lady. Her son, Patrick, just graduated, I think, or is graduating, isn't he? From St. Matthew's Catholic School. Went there with Joseph, played basketball and baseball there. He's going to Bishop Sullivan. And she also is a real estate expert, a Navy veteran. By the way, you can get more information. Go to her new webpage, NavyVetRealty.com, NavyVetRealty.com. She's got it going on. We're happy to have her with us. Kathleen, great to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much, John. It's exciting to be here and watch you in your element.
So, Kathleen, we're going to get into real estate and some things going on in the market, and we're excited to have you with us. But I want to start, you got a fascinating story, because as you were telling me, you're one of the first women to go to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, graduate, and you're a 20-year veteran. I mean, just tell us about that time when you decided to go to the Naval Academy and how you were accepted by different people and kind of how that worked.
Well, actually, I decided to go to the Naval Academy when I was about 11 years old. My father was a reservist, and our family vacations always centered around where we had reserve duty. And that particular summer, it was in Annapolis, Maryland, where the Naval Academy is located. And I remember walking around, and my eyes were wide, and I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. And I went to a reception that was held for my father and other reservists, and I met the superintendent of the Naval Academy, and he asked me how I liked the school, and I was like, oh, I love it, and I want to come here. And he said, well, that's nice, but we don't allow women to come here. And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Women are taxpayers. Shouldn't they be allowed to attend an institution that they're paying for? And I thought at the time, that's ridiculous. At some point, it will open. And I never wavered in my belief that at one point it would open. And in fact, I remember driving to a swim meet the following year with my mother, and the radio announcer announced, and President Ford just announced the opening of the service academies to women. And my mother starts screaming, and I'm like, yeah, I know. It was just a matter of time. And it was. So
you were one of the first entrants in there, right? The first waves.
I was one of 100 women that were accepted with the class of 1984, which was the fifth year that women were admitted to the Naval Academy.
So you were one of 100 out of how many cadets?
There were about midshipmen.
Yeah, midshipmen, sorry.
There were between 11 and 1,200. 99 of us showed up, and ultimately 64 graduated.
So 64 of the original 100 that got accepted graduated.
That's correct.
One just didn't show up.
I don't know why.
So you were in the fifth year, basically. So you were there you had sophomores, juniors, and seniors, right? So there was more women than just your entrant class.
That's right. But they were very much spread out throughout the brigade of midshipmen, and there wasn't a whole lot of support. Last year we celebrated, or the Academy celebrated, 40 years of women in service, and it was really neat to get all the women together and share what we did right and what we did wrong. And we're so happy that now the numbers of women are so much higher than what they were back then, because there was little support. And I remember there was an upper-class midshipman who actually told me, we didn't get any support from the women above us, and we're not going to help you either. I was like, holy cow. And it was like every woman for herself at that time. It was a bad time. It wasn't so great.
But you never wavered, right?
No.
I mean, you wanted a career in the Navy.
I did, and I was fortunate to have that. And
so you graduated in 84 from the Naval Academy, and then did what, Kathleen Murray?
Well, I started off as a supply officer because in 1984 there were very few ships available for women, and the warships were totally closed off. But it only took one tour on a ship here out of Norfolk that made me realize, while I loved being at sea, I loved ships, I didn't want to be a supply officer. And so after a tour with EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, for shore duty, I laterally transferred to surface warfare, and that's how I finished out the rest of my career.
So the first actually ship at sea that you were on, it was recently after you came out after the year shore supply duty.
That's right. That's right. It was USS Yellowstone, the repair ships, and they're no longer with us, which is a real shame.
Right. So you were a pioneer, really. in this? I mean, I know you're shy in that and you're very humble, but like reality is you were one of the women naval graduate pioneers.
I guess so. When I think back on it,
right?
Yes, I was.
I mean,
and so were the other women who did it
right.
with me. Right.
You're in the 5th class ever. So I think that would give you pioneer status. Now, tell me this here, because I think this is just fascinating history and how things have evolved, because now you have to go back to the mid-'80s, right, which was before Clinton's Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was, I think, 93. So you go back to the Reagan era in the 90s, and of course you get tail hook, all that stuff going on. But you got married and got pregnant and were on a ship. How did that, like, just walk us through how that worked?
Well, I decided to have children the last quarter of my Navy career. I did 20 ultimately. And although it wasn't planned that I would deploy right after my daughter's first birthday, that's the way it happened. And that was my last tour at sea. I was assigned to 5 ships, and this one was a frigate out of San Diego. And my daughter was born while we were stationed with the Army in Kansas, and then we moved to San Diego, where my husband went to shore duty, and I went to be the executive officer of the ship, which was a big deal at the time because there were no women at the time assigned to frigates in the Navy, and I was going to be the executive officer.
With no women?
With no women.
So you had to command men?
Lead men. There was the commanding officer, Doug Kyler, who was one of the best captains I ever served for. But it was new for everybody. I remember parking early on at my reserve parking spot on the pier, and a sailor from another ship coming up to me and telling me, "Excuse me, ma'am, but you're not allowed to park there. That's for the executive officer." I was like, "Well, that's me." He's like, "What? There's women on frigates?" "Yeah, right across the pier from you."
Wow. So things have changed a lot. Now, let's just talk turkey here, because as a pioneer in the Navy at this time, you know, I kind of remember some of the harassment that went on and the tailhook incident and a lot of the nuances that some got exposed, some didn't. The level of harassment sexually, I mean, how prevalent was that in your early career in the Navy?
It was prevalent throughout the career. I'd say the only ship I didn't experience it was my last ship, and that was because I was the executive officer. But as I was telling you earlier, looking back, I realized I was so naive when I reported to the USS Yellowstone, and I realize now I was actually sexually harassed by more women at the time than I was men, which I don't know if that's a compliment or not, John.
And this was before, so everybody knows the timeline. Clinton and Senator Sam Nunn from Georgia at the time was instrumental in instituting Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which basically opened the service academy up to those people that were gay, right? Just
That's
don't
right.
say it, you're fine. But prior to that, if you were gay, you wouldn't be able to be admitted, right?
That's right. And on the 3 years that I was assigned to Yellowstone, we had 3 major NIS investigations, and I had season tickets.
And for those laymen listening to us, NIS is, the acronym is?
Naval Investigative Service.
Thank you.
So when there's an issue on a ship that's elevated beyond the level of the commanding officer, you bring in NIS. And I was, as a supply officer, I had one of the largest divisions on the ship, which meant I had over 120 food service attendants, or mess cranks, as they were affectionately called, average age of 19 years old. And so, like most 19-year-olds, they're getting in trouble. So I had season tickets, if you will, to executive officers inquiry, or XOI. I actually, front row, the XO put me there. I never missed an XOI because these kids were always doing something. And every year we had a major NIS investigation, and every year it started the same way. There'd be a fight down in women's berthing. And I'm not talking a little cat fight, scratching, and whatever. I'm talking fists flying and whatever. And then the accusations would start. "Oh, she's gay. Oh, she's gay." Because the fight in women's berthing every year involved a love triangle. And so women who wanted to get out were saying they were gay, and women who didn't want to get out but who were gay were sleeping with some of the guys, quite frankly. It was crazy. Only people who were assigned to those ships at the time can really appreciate what that time was like. It was, I'm glad it's over, frankly.
And then after Don't Ask, Don't Tell was instituted, then it's kind of the same because you weren't supposed to mention anyway.
That's right. You weren't.
So there's not really any change there.
Maybe not. Maybe
right,
not.
Because when you think about it, so interesting that you went as a pioneer, Kathleen Murray. You went through that time. This is the John Fredericks Show with Kathleen Murray of NavyVetRealty.com, and she's with Hewlett and Associates. And I got to just tell you this: it's the summer now. If you want to buy your house or sell your house, now's the time to get moving. And you want to go to Kathleen Murray. You don't want to go to anybody else because she's going to get the job done. Just like this, she got the job done as a woman pioneer in the Navy on ships for a 2-decade career. She's going to get the job done for you. She doesn't waste time and she doesn't mess around. So if you got a house that you want sold and you've got a price in mind, you can go to one of the big boxers out there. Sure, that's easy to do. They'll spend all the money and all the time signing you up, and then you'll get voicemail and somebody will answer and you'll say something and they'll say, wow, that's good to know. Or you can call Kathleen Murray, 757-438-6790, 757-438-6790, or go to her webpage, NavyVetRealty.com. I love that URL, NavyVetRealty.com. Kathleen Murray, she'll get it done for you. She doesn't mess around. State of the Navy today, based on what you experienced, biggest changes.
When I go to the commissary, grocery shopping, and I see women walking around in uniform with warfare pins that when I was a midshipman, I never dreamed that women would have the opportunities, for example, to go on a submarine. I would say, even while I was on active duty, when they first opened up the nuclear power program to women, I was incredulous. I anticipated them opening the service academies, but never in my wildest dreams would I think that women would actually be allowed to fly in combat, to be assigned to nuclear submarines, to warships, all very exciting.
So if you could turn the clock ahead, would you have wanted to serve on a nuclear submarine?
A submarine? No.
I don't think so,
that's
right?
not my thing. Not at all. I love being at sea. I like watching the sun rise at sea. I loved setting the...
So you like being on ships?
I love ships.
But you never, at the time, you couldn't do any combat duty, right?
That's correct.
Right. So you just couldn't do it. Now you can, though. So that's been the biggest change. What do you think of naval leadership now?
With respect to what?
Anything that jumps out of you that you see that you say, that doesn't make any sense?
Doesn't make any sense? I don't know. Mostly what I'm seeing that makes sense, I'm actually excited about the fact that there are women like Admiral Michelle Howard, whom I went to the Naval Academy with. She was a classmate of my husband's. And my classmate, Jan Teague, she was actually a roommate at the Naval Academy, who's a numbered fleet commander in cyber warfare. That's another change that you couldn't have envisioned because there was no such thing as cyber anything in the 1980s. Interesting.
So anything in your naval career you would do over?
Do over? For fun?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I'd want to deploy again. I love deploying. I loved it when you'd hear the whistles on the ship, change of status and the backing bells, everything about it, and just deploying again. I loved deploying.
And you were in San Diego, Guam, where else?
And of course here in Norfolk. For my ships, yes.
And here in Norfolk.
Yeah, I've circumnavigated the world on all the ships combined, and that's an experience I'm so very grateful for. And I thank the taxpayers because I got to be paid to do something that I loved. Not
everybody can say that. I can say that, right?
That's right.
I do what I love. All right, Kathleen, I want to turn, if I can, by the way, I just want to congratulate you on a fascinating naval career as a pioneer, being in the first 5 classes of women going to Annapolis, staying in there for 2 decades, and all the things that you've done. And of course, you shared some stories with me on air that, off air, we can't really talk about on air, but you were there at a very interesting time, no doubt. Let's get to your new career in real estate. Did you just get up one day and said, you know what, I'm going to do real estate? How did this happen? And then talk a little bit about the market. My
real estate career actually began when I was about 12 years old. I began reading the real estate section. Not something that most 12-year-olds do.
Why'd you do that?
We had a family friend involved in real estate, and I just had so much respect for Mrs. Viador. And I don't know, like you were drawn to radio, perhaps. I was just drawn to real estate. And I remember even asking my mother to take me to open houses. We'd be driving along and say, Mom, stop, I want to go look at the open house. And I'd read the section. But ultimately, I really wanted to be in the Navy. And while I was still in the Navy, I began investing in real estate. And towards the end of my career, I read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And that just affirmed what I wanted to do in my second career. And especially at that point, I retired from the Navy pregnant with my fourth child. And I thought it was a career that would be flexible and allow me to spend time with my family, as well as pursue a passion that I've had since I was a child.
So it all worked out. Let me just ask you this. When you meet with somebody, what are the top 3 questions now you get, Kathleen, as a realtor from people?
Well, no matter who I meet, whether or not they're interested in buying or selling at the time, they want to know, how is the market? And what I tell them is the market is great. And if they are interested in buying, there's like, well, what do I need to do as a prospective home buyer to get the house of my dreams? And if they're looking to sell, they want to know, well, what do I have to do to sell my home? And I need to sell quickly, for example. So I walk them through those questions.
So if somebody wants to sell their home, they want to sell it fast and they want to get the best price, because everybody has a price in mind they list their home, but then they kind of know what they're going to negotiate off. What would your answer be?
So I tell them that when it comes to selling a home, that it's a beauty contest and it's a price war. So it's a beauty contest in that the nicest house at the best price or the most competitive price is the one that's going to sell quickly and at the best price.
And so what are some of the things that when you have a home listed and you're talking to potential buyers, or engaging potential buyers, what are some of the things, Kathleen, that differentiates yourself from those with the big firms with all the billboards and everything else?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
How does your approach, how do you differentiate yourself from your competition?
Well, I take a very personal relation. I make a point of establishing a relationship with the buyer or the seller. I'm not your one and done realtor. It's not about the commission for me. The interests of the client always, always, always come first, no matter what. So, and I try and get the best price. If you're the seller, I want to get the highest price for your property and sell it as quickly as possible so that you can move on. And if you're the buyer, I'm going to negotiate the lowest price possible so that you can get the home of your dream. Because the market in some areas is such that it's become very competitive. And if you see a house you want, you need to know how to approach the seller and how to actually get the deal closed
in a fast and efficient manner.
Exactly.
Which is really the key. Tell us about how is the real estate market in this area in Southeast Virginia now?
All right. Well, it's going gangbusters. It's amazing. Right now, inventory is really low. It's around a 5-month supply. Normally, it's around 6, but in the past, last year was as high as 7-month supply. And the average price or the average time for a home on the market is now only 44 days. So if you price your house right, you can expect to sell within 44 days.
Right now, within that's about a month and a half, right?
That's correct.
So that's where the market is now. So it's kind of heating up. If I want to buy a house right now, what do I need to do?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is tell you, go see a lender. And at Hewlett & Associates, we have an in-house lender. You can use one of our lenders or get your own. I always tell clients, shop around, get the best rate possible. Because there's no sense in me driving you around to look at homes, you fall in love with the house, and then you find out that you're not even qualified. And when it comes to investment real estate, which is something I specialize in as well, a lot of times, unless you have a pre-approval letter from a lender, you're not even going to be allowed to see the property without a letter from a lender saying you have been pre-approved and qualified for a certain loan amount. So that's the first thing I tell people to do.
So when you talk about an investment property, like walk us through what that would be.
Oh, I love investment real estate. And the neat thing about investment real estate, especially if you ever if you're a veteran, for example, is that you can actually use your VA loan to buy investment property. For example, last year I had 2 very junior sailors, and they each bought a duplex. And if you qualify for a VA loan, which is 0 money down, and you intend to occupy at least one of those units, the VA will loan you money to buy up to a 4-plex or a 4-unit apartment. I'm actually working with the buyer now who that's his way to financial freedom. When he retires from the Navy, that's his plan. He's going to have investment properties all over, all of them bought using the VA loan.
So you buy the property using the loan, and then you basically turn these into rentals.
After you occupy it, the VA is very specific about it.
So you have to occupy it.
Yes, you do.
Live there.
So in this case, the sailors that I worked with last year, they were both on the same ship. They rented one side, which nearly paid the mortgage. It was great. And then they occupied the other side. So they're able to buy investment real estate for little to nothing down and have somebody else pay their mortgage. It doesn't get any better than that.
Right. And then, of course, they own the property. They live there. So they're living without paying anything, right?
That's right.
And they're building value in the investment property.
That's right. And if they get orders someplace else or they get out of the Navy, they can repeat the process again. They can continue to rent that property in Hampton Roads or wherever, and then buy another property and do it again and again. The last sailor I worked with, he had just turned 23 years old. And he said, I'm going to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30. And there's no doubt in my mind he'll be able to do just that.
That's unbelievable. They buy it and they're occupying it, but then they get orders to go somewhere else. Then obviously they can rent out whatever portion they were living in because they can't do anything about the orders to get transferred.
Exactly.
And so then they get a positive income coming in.
Exactly. Positive cash flow.
Then they get transferred to San Diego. They do the same thing there.
I wish I had known about that when I was a brand new...
You wouldn't be here talking to me, would you?
That's right. Well, I don't know. I like talking with you, John.
You'd be on some island someplace. By the way, we're with Kathleen Murray of Kathleen Murray Real Estate, and you can check her out. Go to her new website, which is NavyVetRealty.com. NavyVetRealty.com, or you can call Kathleen at any time and get more information, 757-438-6790, 757-438-6790. You can also go to her Facebook page, Kathleen Murray Real Estate. And Kathleen, 20-year Navy veteran, one of the first 5 classes of women that went to Annapolis. So she's a pioneer there, and also one of the first women to be what was the title again?
Well, I was the first woman to go to a frigate.
First woman in history.
Yes.
Well, that's pretty big.
I think so. I got
to go to a frigate.
I got a call from the Surface Forces Pacific asking to speak to the XO, and I said, "Well, that's me." And he's like, "What? Do we have women on frigates?" It's like, "Yeah, I thought you would have known that." But John, I mean, there's been so many women who have done more groundbreaking things than that.
That doesn't matter. You're still a star because you're the first one. And what was your title?
I was the executive officer.
EO, executive officer.
Well, okay, XO we called it on
XO
on USS Wadsworth.
If Frank Wagner was with me, he'd be chewing me out because I don't have all this stuff down for the Navy. XO, got it. Look, if I want to sell my home now for top dollar, what do I do? All
right. Well, this may sound kind of silly, but I would say get on HGTV and watch a couple of shows like Property Brothers or Flip or Flop, because that'll tell you that when it comes to buying, a lot of buyers get very emotional about their home. And so the first thing you want to do is spruce up the outside. I was reading a newsletter just last night that said in seconds, a potential buyer is going to assess whether or not they're even interested in your home. And I even worked with the buyer, pulled up in front of the home. The curb appeal was awful. And she said, not interested. And I was like, don't you want to go inside? Nope, not interested. So basic things like paint the front door, because chances are there's going to be a lockbox on the front door. And while the realtor is fiddling around with getting the key out of the lock, the buyer's standing there looking around. Are there cobwebs around the front porch? Is the door painted? Just little things that make them think, has this home been well cared for? Are there problems that we don't see behind the front door because they're neglecting little things like the landscaping and like the front entryway?
I would have never thought of that. That makes a lot of sense. Paint that front door because you're standing there staring at the door while the realtor is getting the lockbox key. Kathleen, I got about 3 minutes. I want you to walk me through the story you told me the other day about the gentleman whose home you sold that wanted to bring his price down because your company and how you work is built on relationships, and you really encouraged him not to do that. And then he got the majority of his price just because he took your advice. Can you walk us through that, Kathleen?
Well, Doug is a friend of mine that I served with in the Navy, and we got an offer on a fourplex that he owned, and it was a lot lower than the asking price. But Doug was like, you know what, I just want to be done with this. But I crunched the numbers, and it's like, Doug, I don't think this is wise based on what you owe and what you're going to get. You'll be lucky if you break even. And Doug's like, no, move forward. Well, thanks be to God, the buyer backed out of it at the last minute. And Doug said, go back to him, go back. Tell him we'll lower the price again. And I'm going to do all these other repairs or improvements that he might want. So I went online and I looked at the market and I was like, Doug, if you do that, you're making a huge mistake. There is so little competition in the fourplex market right now. I think you can still get your asking price. And sure enough, a few weeks later, we got a buyer that made an offer that we just could not refuse. Very minimal repairs that have to be done, and we're looking at a closing probably on Thursday. So I'm just delighted that Doug is going to walk away with some cash in his pocket instead of potentially having to take money to closing, which you never want your client to do.
So where your competitors would have just taken the first offer because they're after the commission, and so to them, so it might be $150 or so difference. But you, on the other hand, you knew the property was worth more, so you encouraged your client to hold out, and then he got it. And now we're talking tens of thousands of dollars that he wouldn't have gotten based on your counsel and your advice. That's why if you want to sell a home, you go to one of the big boxers. We tell this story because here's what they would have done. They would have taken that offer. And if he said lower the price, they'd have gone back and lower the price because all they want to do is get the commission. So for them, it's a couple $100 difference. For the buyer, tens of thousands. That's why you want to go to Kathleen, because she's going to get the job done and she's going to tell you the truth and she's going to get your price. Kathleen Murray Real Estate. I wouldn't go to anybody else. NavyVetRealty.com. Even her website, NavyVetRealty.com. Just her URL right there gives you all you need to know. NavyVetRealty.com. She's a sponsor, obviously, of the John Fredericks Show. You've heard her ads many times, and we thank her for that. But you want to sell a house, NavyVetRealty.com, or give Kathleen a call yourself. Just have a conversation like we're having now. 757-438-6790. 757-438-6790. What's the number? 757-438-6790. Mike Coleman's all over, especially that investment property. Or you can go to Kathleen Murray Real Estate on her Facebook page. Kathleen, great job. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, John.